Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving right in, unlocking the science behind our feelings. Think of this as a user's guide to your own emotions, something that'll help you understand not just yourself, but like every relationship in your life.
So let's start with the big one, the most basic question there is. What even are emotions? I mean, really? Because the answer, well, it's the key to understanding pretty much everything. Love, family, friendships, even conflict.
You know, science has a pretty dry way of looking at it. They'll tell you it's a physiological response to an external stimulus. Okay, sure. But for us, for actual humans, it's so much more than that, right? It's the stuff that separates us from machines. It's what makes us, well, us. And here's why this is so important. When you get the hang of how emotions actually work, it's almost like you get a superpower. Seriously, you start to see why people do the things they do, and maybe even more crucial, you get a handle on your own reactions, which, let's be honest, is where a lot of our problems come from.
All right, so to make sense of the thousands of different feelings we can have, we've got to go back to basics. We need the building blocks. And psychology tells us that there are just 8 primary emotions that kind of create everything else. Yeah, you heard that right. Just 8. Every single complex feeling you've ever had, the hive in you romance, the gut punch of betrayal, it's all just a mix of these 8 core emotions. A great way to think about it is like they're the primary colors of your emotional world.
And what's really cool is how these 8 are set up. They're not random. They exist in 4 pairs of total opposites. So you've got joy, and on the other side, sadness. You've got trust, and its opposite, disgust. Then there's fear, which is balanced by anger. And finally, you have surprise, which is the flip side of anticipation. Okay, but it gets even deeper. See, each of these 8 feelings isn't just on or off. It's not a switch. They all exist on a spectrum, right? And we can break that spectrum down into 3 different levels of intensity.
Let's just take joy, for example. At its lowest setting, you've got serenity. That's that calm, peaceful, everything is okay feeling. Now, turn the dial up a bit, and you get actual joy. That's when you're smiling, you're expressive, and other people can see you're happy. Then you crank it all the way to the max, and you hit ecstasy. That's that overwhelming, almost explosive happiness that can literally bring you to tears. And this actually points to something really profound about life, I think. The real secret to a balanced, happy life isn't about chasing those super intense, fleeting moments of ecstasy. It's about building a foundation of serenity. That calm, sustainable state, that's where the real magic is. And this whole 3-level thing works for the opposite emotion too, sadness. It starts off quiet with something called pensiveness, just some negative thoughts kind of swirling around. Then it gets stronger and becomes sadness, where your unhappiness is obvious to other people. And at its most intense, well, that's grief, the deepest kind of emotional pain. Okay, so now we get to the really amazing part. Once you get a grip on these core emotions and their different intensities, you can start to see how they mix and match. Kind of like a chemist mixing elements. And this is how we get all those super complex feelings we experience every single day. Let's kick things off with the biggest one of all, love. What's the formula for love? Well, psychologically, it's actually beautiful in its simplicity. It's a combination of serenity, remember that's the lowest level of joy, plus acceptance. And acceptance is just the mildest, most basic form of trust. So there it is, calm happiness plus a fundamental sense of trust. That's the recipe. And this simple formula perfectly explains why we so often talk about a mother's love as our first love. Think about it. For a baby, assuming a healthy environment, their very first and most constant experience of serenity and acceptance, it comes from their mom. It's just the purest, most basic example of that emotional chemistry at work. But watch what happens when you just swap out one ingredient. Let's say you keep that acceptance, that foundation of trust. But instead of serenity, you mix it with apprehension, which is the mildest form of fear. Well, you don't get love. What you get is submission. And that is an incredibly destructive force in any relationship. And the big takeaway here is that even though a relationship built on submission might look stable from the outside, it comes at a huge cost. Any relationship that's built on a foundation of fear, even that low-level fear, is going to slowly but surely just chip away at a person's self-respect. Once you start to see these formulas, you start seeing these emotional cocktails everywhere.
You can spot the healthy ones, like optimism, which is really just a mix of joy and anticipation. But you can also start to identify the more toxic blends, like remorse, which is sadness mixed with disgust, or one of the most dangerous ones out there, contempt. So let's take a closer look at that one, contempt. This is the emotional cocktail you get when you mix disgust and anger. And we're not just talking about disliking someone here. This is an active, really dangerous feeling. It's the point where you cross a line and actually start wanting to cause harm to somebody. So, why does any of this emotional chemistry matter? Well, because understanding it isn't just some fun, theoretical thing. It's a real, practical tool. It's the tool we can use to heal some of our deepest wounds and this is the most important part, to stop passing our pain down to the next generation. You can see the chain of events here, and it's pretty heartbreaking. See, emotional trauma, it doesn't just go away. A grandfather's pain, for example, can show up as a father's unresolved anger. And then that anger gets passed down to his child, who then carries that exact same emotional poison forward. The cycle just keeps on going. And this metaphor really just captures the choice and the responsibility that every single one of us has. A child is like an empty glass, and you can either unconsciously pour all the poison you've been carrying around into that glass, or you can make a conscious choice to heal yourself and fill their glass with love instead. And that conscious choice, that's what we mean when we talk about healing. It's the intentional process of breaking that negative cycle. So where does it begin? Well, it always starts by finding your way back to that foundational state of peace we mentioned right at the beginning, back to serenity. And listen, healing isn't some vague, abstract idea. It comes from real, tangible places. You can find it in the serenity of a good family connection, or in the joy you get from true friendships, and in that deep sense of peace that comes when you just disconnect from all the noise and reconnect with your own self. So this whole explainer really boils down to one final, very personal question. Now that you kind of see the chemistry behind your feelings, you've got to ask yourself, what unresolved emotions are you carrying around? And what are you pouring into the glasses of the people in your life?